Katie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about the moment that you realized something was just a little off with Collin.
Oh, that's a good question. Um, well, I would say with MED13L and especially how MED13L presents in my son, it wasn't just one moment. It's a collection of a lot of little moments, and that's why it's so hard to diagnose. Um, Collin was my third son, so I kind of knew what I thought the development pathway should look like. And there's a really wide margin for developmental goals, for what is typical. So Collin's journey and a lot of kids with MED13L's journey is it's a lot of dismissing of worries, telling parents it's going to be fine. You know, they're not delayed until it's been a much longer milestone marker than it's saying on your pediatrician's survey. So, and also when you're in it, you're kind of in a silo and you're viewing all these things in a vacuum. So when I received Collin's diagnosis at 16 months, I was devastated and floored because when I was reading this collection of symptoms and looking at my 16-month-old, I just had a really hard time reconciling what these symptoms were on paper and what his life was going to look like compared to my son in front of me. Now, having some time looking back, there was a lot of things going on that I just, again, viewing it in a vacuum, it wasn't huge to me, but when I looked at all of his symptoms, it was very clear.
What are some of those signs that parents should look for in a potential MED13L diagnosis?
So the Collin's first sign that I dismissed was failure to latch. So trying to feed and breastfeeding. Again, he was my third. So I was already planning on just pumping and moving along, and we didn't have time to, play this game of let's have everything work out perfectly. So he had a really hard time latching, and I wrote it off as, a lot of kids have a hard time latching, and we didn't have time to work on it. So we're just going to pump, and this is how we have success. The next thing for Collin was he had bilateral hernia, inguinal hernia. So again, those are common in kids, especially in babies. So, again, doctors are going to kind of dismiss that as it happens. He also had a really floppy airway. So we heard some labored breathing. We heard suspected aspiration. So, when he's drinking milk, it sounded wet while he was drinking. And then after, they kind of have that wet cough. Again, laryngomalacia, which is a floppiness of the airway, floppiness of your larynx. Tracheomalacia, so it just means that it just extends a little further down. Very common symptoms. So the early signs are things that as one-offs are very common in babies, and pediatricians are very quick to, which is a good thing, send you to the specialist. But what's hard is specialists also operate in a vacuum. So unless you are the one or your pediatrician is the one taking a global look at your child, it's going to get missed. Next for Collin was around 4 months of age. His eyes started crossing. Again, that is common with kids, but strabismus is common with kids with MED13L. Then his head shape was, appeared to be a little flatter, which doctors wrote off as just, sleeping on their back, causing the flatness. But, it's how his head was formed. And then at 6 months, I did have a physical therapy evaluation, and he was within the range of, he was on the lower end, but he was within the typical range. We also had a speech assessment at that time. He was within the typical range. It wasn't until that 9-month mark that we really started to see he was not meeting his gross motor skills or his speech skills.
So there's a lot of different pieces that go into some of these symptoms of MED13L. So what is MED13L in a nutshell?
It's hard to describe any of these conditions in a nutshell. So MED13L syndrome is when there is a pathogenic mutation on the MED13L gene, which results in a neurodevelopmental disorder. So a lot of our main symptoms are intellectual disability, severe speech delay or absent speech. When you look at the symptoms, you're going to see behavior challenges as well. But really digging in there, the behavior stems from an inability to communicate your needs. And, you could imagine if you were constantly being misunderstood, you may exhibit some challenging behaviors too. So I really, a lot of our kids don't have classic symptoms associated with autism, but if you go to a good psychologist or developmental pediatrician, they will understand that they do meet criteria for an autism diagnosis, and having that autism diagnosis is how they're going to get their needs met. Most doctors you will meet, most therapists will have never heard of MED13L. So it is going to be on the parents to educate them. But it is an autism diagnosis that is going to get you in the door. It's going to get insurance to pay for things. And that's really important. Along the same lines, also a cerebral palsy diagnosis. Our kids have some severe gross motor delays, as well as ataxia-like movements, a lot of imbalance, coordination, and they do also meet criteria for a cerebral palsy diagnosis.
So do the cerebral palsy diagnosis and an autism diagnosis always come along with MED13L syndrome, or is that sometimes here and sometimes not?
If your child has MED13L syndrome, you should seek out doctors who will give your child both of those diagnoses, because that is how you're going to set up your child to have the most success. And I view it as like a VIP pass too, to get into, see those doctors, get access to resources. There are providers out there who will see a child with what I would call classic MED13L symptoms, and they will say, this child does not have autism, this child does not have cerebral palsy. But a provider who is kept up with the current trends in research knows that not only do they meet criteria, giving them this diagnosis is very important for them to get their needs met.
And those needs, is that more on a treatment basis, making sure that, because of the autism diagnosis or the cerebral palsy diagnosis, that it's more common? So the medications, maybe the treatments, is that why that diagnosis is so important?
I would say the biggest challenge is access to therapy. And depending on what your insurance looks like, there are various barriers. When you have an autism or a cerebral palsy diagnosis, that is how you are going to get access to the intensive therapeutic intervention you need for your child, especially at the earliest that they can intervene too.
And making sure that insurance covers
correct
specifically, because most insurance companies probably haven't even heard of MED13L syndrome, which leads me to the question, how rare is MED13L?
You're asking all the hard-hitting questions today. That is one of the number one questions when I talk to someone who just received a diagnosis. There's how many people have been diagnosed? How many people in America are diagnosed? How many people globally are diagnosed? And it really, it breaks my heart every time to say, we don't know that true number. It is a number one priority of me at the foundation. to, and that's why we have the 2026 census, and, it's trying to get every single person who has a MED13L diagnosis to fill it out so we can get that count. But, we don't have anything in place from a healthcare point of view, keeping track of that number. So I joined the foundation in 2022. And since then, I've been putting together a list of trying to track down every single person diagnosed. And I have a list of around 550 names. That's a global number, but there are so many people I know that aren't on that list. So there is a research paper that says the prevalence is anywhere between 2 to 6 out of every 100,000 live births. We have an article on our website that says, what is the prevalence? And if you extrapolate that number, and if every single person with MED13L got a diagnosis, that number should be around 415,000 people. So somewhere between 400 and 500,000.
Wow, that is. But right now the census is only 550, so that
Correct.
leaves
Actually,
such
that's
a
not
large
even
gap.
the census that we built out as a foundation. Only about 60 people have filled it out. When I refer to the 550 people, that is me talking to community members, me talking to other regional ambassadors in other countries, and just trying so hard to put in place an infrastructure that we can get an accurate patient count.
It seems like an impossible task. So I know that you're the one that's going to be able to go after that, but that seems like such a difficult task. I want to kind of turn the focus a little bit and talk about the foundation. And as the president of the MED13L Foundation, you talk a lot about turning stories into science.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that?
So this was my experience, and talking to other parents, it's been their experience as well. When you walk into a doctor's office and you realize that doctor has never heard of your child's condition before, it is a very devastating feeling. And, I describe it as kind of, you feel like you're losing your power as a parent. How do you ensure your child's needs are met if you can't talk to anyone who's even heard of your child's condition before? So, the next step is they hand you a few research articles on the condition, and you read the articles and you look at your child and you say, these symptoms this doesn't describe my child. Did you get it wrong? Are you sure you know what you're talking about? Like, oh my gosh, maybe this is all just a terrible nightmare. And that's when we did a global literature review, and we marked all the different symptoms that has been reported in our research journals. Then last year we did a caregiver-led interview with a genetic counselor at Rutgers. And we had the genetic counselor interview 16 different caregivers or parents of individuals with MED13L. And they had the caregivers share the person they were caring for, symptoms associated, what their challenges were, what their success were. And during that process, we found there were 55 symptoms that were never before reported. So it's never once mentioned in the research. And I think the reason is because the research is based on what researchers thought was important, or what researchers assumed parents would care about. But when you're not having caregivers in the room, when they are not the center of the conversation, you're not going to get the needs met of this population. And so historically, families have been excluded from these conversations. And so that's where I kind of came up with turning stories into science and providing these platforms that we can fill out the surveys. We can tell researchers, this is what we care about. If you could do one thing for my child to make sure they live their best life, they are happy, they achieve the goals that I know that they can achieve, this is what this one thing would be. This is what the handful of things would be. And it's not going to be what a researcher thinks. It's going to be what a parent or a caregiver is telling you. And so, we're taking these stories and we're using them by filling out surveys. And then from those surveys, we are generating actual data to show this is what this disease looks like. I want to be able to tell a parent, this is what your child's mutation is. Based on where this mutation is, this is where this is what symptoms I think your child may have. This is the best way you can support them. These are all the things you can be doing for them. Maybe right now, their likelihood of developing seizures, they have a 30% higher increase of developing seizure than, a typically developing child. But if they don't have seizures by age 8, that number goes down to 5%. Or just being able to give parents measurable metrics to know, what doctor appointments should I make? What therapies should I do? What should I be watching out for? Because without those guidelines, as a parent, it is exhausting because you want to know that you're doing everything. And when you don't know what everything is, you're just, how do you ever go to sleep?
Yeah, incredibly lost, I would imagine. Can you tell me about the mind study that you guys are doing with the Boston Children's Hospital? I
Yeah.
have a feeling that has a lot to do with what you're talking about, right?
So it's along the same lines, and it was really exciting because Boston Children's Hospital actually reached out to the MED13L Foundation for this partnership, which that was the first time, we had a clinically based institution reach out to us saying, we are interested based on your community, based on your community showing up. We want to partner with you. So that was really affirming from a foundation standpoint. We decided to, invest in this opportunity because this will be a 3-year longitudinal study. So we will be able to see, how does this disease progress by studying the same cohort of patients over 3 years. And we were very mindful to, as much as possible, get people at different ages and different stages of growth, so we could really kind of track what symptoms may develop, what challenges may arise, what successes and goals and gains someone may achieve during this time. So, and we worked really hard to get it diverse as achievable as we could, because we really wanted to give a global snapshot of what this disease looks like over the course of 3 years.
What would you say is the biggest bottleneck for most rare diseases like MED13L syndrome?
Just one. I think, the first thing that's going to jump to mind is funding. Because even my friends said, they were like, oh, wow, okay. So, wow, you got a $250,000 grant to Boston Children's. That's amazing. I go, no, we issued the grant. We have to pay them to do this work. And, she responded, oh, so does insurance pay for any of that? Or how does that work? And, it's a devastating piece of, you go to a doctor's office, they've never heard of your child's condition before. So you're paying them your copay to educate them on your child's condition. And then on the back end, in order to obtain the resources and the education, we need to fund research to find out that information, what the answers are. And it's all self-funded by, parents of children with MED13L. So, it's definitely funding and capacity to get the work that desperately needs to be done.
That leads me to it leads me to a question that I know that I'm intrigued to know the answer to. If 1 million people saw this interview today, what do you think that would mean for all the children suffering with MED13L syndrome?
Again, a really good question. Well, if everyone could just give $1 that would be amazing. Give us 1 cup of coffee. I think I constantly am blowing my friends' minds in not a good way of just what it is like to have a child with a rare disease and how the uncertainty of what life will look like, and the uncertainty of, am I doing everything I can do to give my child the best shot at life? And that's not just because you're not asking that question because your child has MED13L or another rare disorder. I ask that for all of my kids. I look at, all of my sons and what can I do to make sure I'm setting them up for success, to make sure their needs are met. And there's a lot of books, there's a lot of resources on different strengths and different challenges my other 2 sons have. There's nothing for what Collin has besides what we have built ourselves as a foundation, besides what we have funded researchers to do, using money from selling cupcakes and bracelets to, selling, having bigger fundraisers. But again, we are doing it all ourselves. And, even at the board, we have an amazing team, but none of us went to school for this. None of us chose the reason why we are there, except for our one amazing board member. So, we are not experts in this field, but we are parents. And at the end of the day, if you want something done, and if you ask someone who is emotionally driven to get it done, it will get done. But I think, if I could get 1 million people to understand how challenging it is to make progress.
How do you manage your mental health when raising a child with a rare disease like MED13L syndrome, but then also having other children that are, going through their lives in a more normal way? How do you manage both sides of that equation?
I will say my dark humor has really increased, and I think I'm still refining some of it, but there's a Jimmy Buffett song that says, if we couldn't laugh, we'd all go insane. So definitely, when you're just overwhelmed by life, just kind of finding the humor where you can, but it's also finding the people you can laugh with. And those people are the people whose hard probably looks like your hard. And, for me, in, being the work I do with the foundation, I have the privilege to meet a lot of parents of children with MED13L. But I've also formed community with parents who are, rare disease leaders and other rare diseases. And our hards look very similar. And then on a, local level, it's, I have friends who, all of our children have an autism diagnosis, and it is a wide spectrum. And the challenges all of our children have are very different. But again, we understand what a problem is. We can laugh at some of the things that other people think are a problem. And we see each other. So I think, surrounding yourself with people who see you is really, really important. And I also try to work out in the morning, and I'm not necessarily working out to stay in shape, although we do need to stay in shape because Collin is getting bigger and stronger and I'm getting older and weaker, but also just to get the endorphins to think through, and just, it really, when I come home in the morning, when I come back in the morning and everyone's kind of getting ready for school, it's just, it's a really good way to start off my day.
Yeah, I can see that. What would you define as the value of community?
Community is invaluable. It is, you can't do anything without community. I think from a foundation point of view, community engagement needs to be your number one pillar. Before you're asking your community to do anything, you need to make sure their needs are being met. You need to make sure you are supporting them in a way that you are able to, with whatever resources you have. But, you need to make yourself available to talk to people. You need to meet everyone where they're at, and be there for them and show up for them. And then, on a personal level, again, finding someone who's hard, looks like you're hard there's nothing that beats that. Someone that you can go out with and trade war stories and laugh about some, pretty wild stories. I ran into a friend on the street, and she was really struggling with potty training, and another friend and I were, kind of trading different children poop stories, and she was just like, how are you guys laughing? I'm like, what else are you gonna do? Like, it's, but these are the things that help, and this is how I can support you. But it's just, yeah, there's nothing beats community.
What would you say to somebody that had a child that received the MED13L syndrome diagnosis today?
We're here for you. And let's come together, and we're in this together. And, first I'd like to hear more about the challenges your child's facing, and how can we support you, and what kind of resources, guidance, advice do you need, are you looking for? There are challenges, but there's also a lot of beauty. And, that's what someone told me when I received Collin's diagnosis. And it was very, I was really sad, obviously. And there's a lot of beauty when you approach life and live life when you have MED13L. And I don't know anyone who is happier than Collin. I don't know anyone who laughs harder, who just wants to be friends with people. And, I said, at the end of the day, as a parent, you just want your child to be happy. And if you are prioritizing giving your child the tools to communicate their needs, they're going to be a happy child and a happy adult.
What would you say through Collin's MED13L diagnosis is one of the things that he's taught you that no one else might have been able to teach you?
Well, I think children in general can teach you patience in a way nobody else can. And I don't know the exact quote, but there's a line in a Noah Kahn song too that talks about if this had never happened, I'd never had met this version of myself. And I really like this version of myself too. So he's taught me to be, I think, a better mom, a better friend, not always a better wife. I'm sure my husband would have some feedback there, but he definitely, I've said before, he's given me the gift of perspective. There are a lot of things that even my friends worry about that. It's definitely something I laugh about with my other friends. Like, it's life is not that deep, and life is also hard. So celebrate whenever you can. Enjoy the wins.
Speaking of wins, what would you say is the biggest win or progress maybe that you're looking forward to here in 2026 for the MED13L Foundation?
We hired a chief scientific officer this January. So he's been with us 2 months now, and what he has been doing for MED13L and some of the projects that he is putting together and strategizing and leaning on, any relationships or just different knowledge that he knows, what we're going to fund this year, I think this is going to be our biggest year yet. And I'm just so excited to be able to, sign some of these things on the dotted line, issue some press statements to the community, and get some results to the community. I think we started this research piece in 2021, 2022, and we didn't know what it looked like. We didn't know, what was realistic. And I think, we made some big promises and some big statements that we didn't know. And I think this year we are going to be able to come through on some things that we've been hoping to come through on for a while.
That's amazing. To close out today, we have, potentially the world's attention. We said potentially 1 million, but it could be more. So if you had the world's attention for 1 minute, what would you tell them?
Man, how am I going to formulate this? Okay. So I think, I mentioned before about just the lack of resources, the lack of support and infrastructure is really jarring. That everything that is in place for individuals with rare disease like MED13L is built by caregivers of these individuals. I think we can do better. I think at the very least, we need to be able to tell our community how many people have been diagnosed with this disorder. We need to be tracking that information, and we need to be working directly with the leaders of the rare disease groups. There's so much that happens at these conferences that, if there were people who could really affect change, who would show up and care, and the people who can do something to help, I think they would be blown away by what has been done by parents who have, again, no background. This was not something they chose, but something they were thrown into. But I think, the average person listening might not be that person. But you might know somebody who has a loved one diagnosed, and it's really hard to support someone going through this because we don't even know the support that we need. Ambiguous grief is really, really hard. And I think it's something that you kind of go through the entirety of your journey with your loved one, because at this point, it is ambiguous. We don't know what we're grieving. We don't know what our child's life will look like. But what you can do is we need to be with people who can sit. I kind of say, like, sit in the suck with us. It's not the people who stand at the top of the hole saying, like, you good? You're good, right? No, we need the people who just don't even think twice and jump down the hole and sit next to us and say, I'm here. Because if you ask me what I need, I don't know. If you tell me you'll do anything, just let you know. Okay, I don't even know what I need. But if you can sit next to me, and if you can take some of the, when you're grieving, you lash out a little bit too. So if you can take that and still love us and, love our children and be there and show up, and if you can teach your children to be inclusive so we can be a more inclusive world, I think that's something you can do. And then if you
That's
have more
amazing,
money,
Katie.
donate too. That'd be great.
I think that's a perfect ending. That was beautifully said. I think there's so much power in being able to help somebody knowing that you've been there before. You know what they need, and I think that's the power of community that we're trying to build at Dreamers Health. So I appreciate your time today, and anyone that wants to follow you, where can they find you?
We are on Facebook and Instagram and X at MED13L Foundation. We are also on LinkedIn as well. And our website is
Awesome.
med13l.org.
Awesome. Katie, thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much, Adam.